Well, Simon, this is and everyone, this is a thrilling day for me because I feel a little like a midwife to this book, The Poet and the Sage. I had the privilege of seeing it start from a seed and flourish into a fully realized work. That's a beautiful thing to bear witness to. This is also special for me because Simon and I today, I think, get to reverse roles a little bit. Usually he has interviewed me, and this time I have some questions for him. Simon, with your book, you've given us, what would we call it? You've given us a universal, non-sectarian, mythic fable that uses language to point us toward the ineffable. And that's a tall order. My hope is that you'll tell this lovely group of people the origin story of your book, because it's a terrific story on many levels. First, because of the nature of the work itself, but also I think it's helpful for all of us to hear creation journeys over and over again, because they remind all of us that we are each vessels of unique and needed expressions. I think we also need to repeatedly learn that creation is less a story about exerting one's will and more a matter of allowing something to come through us, to be humble enough to permit something larger than yourself and unpredictable to use you as its instrument of realization. So, Simon, are you willing to tell us the origin story of this remarkable book?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sharon. And yeah, so I guess the point that I would start at would have to be the moment when I actually decided that I was going to quit my job as a gym manager and move towards doing the podcast and coaching and all of this stuff as my occupation. And I say occupation because this stuff that I'm doing, whether it is with my writing or my coaching or the podcast and all this sort of stuff, it's not a job. It's not necessarily a career. It's an occupation that I feel really drawn into. And there was that moment where, I heard that quote from Jordan Peterson where he was kind of saying, you should pick the highest ideal you can conceive of in your life, and you should start to move towards that. And the reason is because what the hell have you got to do that's better than that? And when I heard that, he backed me into a logical corner, right? Yeah. And I said, well, what the hell am I doing here? Like, I loved my job at the gym. I loved the people, but I knew that there was something else that was not being offered from me that could be offered if I decided to actually let go, jump in the deep end and see what happened. And I think what started to happen, Sharon, and I was really thinking about this last night. I've been thinking about this for a while, actually. The way that I see the world now, the way that I engage with the world now, the way I see myself now, if I put that up against the way I saw the world and myself when I left the gym, it's not the same vision. I don't see the same thing. I don't feel the same things. I don't experience the same experiences in the same way. And I think that that's because what has happened as I've really dived into this path of trying to search for deeper and deeper wisdom, or perhaps even higher and higher aims, is my fundamental metaphysical structure, the language that I use, the stories I seek, the music I listen to has changed. Everything that I'm feeding into this body has changed. And with that, what is happening is it's restructuring the way I see everything. And so what started to happen was, you know, everyone should know that this is a book of poetry and prose. That's not all that it is, but that's essentially the style. Now, I never wrote poetry. I mean, I wrote a few when I was younger, like here and there, these silly little kids' poems, right? And my dad still has them, and he brings them out from time to time to remind me that there was still a spark back then. But I was never interested in poetry. I was never interested. Like, I didn't read an entire book until I was like 20. And I'm serious. Like, I studied my textbooks for school and everything, but I was just not interested in, I don't know, what they were offering. And then I decided 2020, that if I was going to write a book, it had better be something completely honest, coming from a place that is truly me. And it was actually an accident. I stumbled into this book, and the way, and you know this, Sharon, because you were there, the way that I stumbled into this book was I was writing one day, and I started writing this kind of waking dream that I was having. This very strange, symbolic, kind of poetic dream that was just happening. And it was really an absurd dream. And it's actually in the book. It's one of the chapters. And I thought, what the heck is this? I thought, what do I do with this? Because I just kept on writing, and this thing just came out. And it's this strange metaphysical trip, you know. And so I kind of took this to Sharon, because she was really the only person who I knew that Sharon would have the right kind of advice when she read this. And so I showed her this, and I said, you know, Sharon, what do you think of this? And Sharon, just like the true artist that she is, you know, Sharon really knows how to deal with creative people, because what she said was exactly the right advice, which is just, you know, sit with this. You know, she tells me constantly to which means to not say yes, not say no, but to sit with an idea, sit with a thought. But also she said, just keep on writing it. Just keep on writing it. Just see where it goes, see where it goes. And Sharon, you helped me to be reborn into the artist and the poet that I'm supposed to be. And I can say that because now I'm about, I think, between 250 to 300 poems in, and my first book, you know, released. And this has all happened over the period of about a year and a half, not even that. And it began with me writing that crazy little dream, taking it to you and saying, what do I do with this? And what you gave me back was exactly what a young poet needed to hear. And so that's why, you know, I think, Sharon, like, this book is as much a success of your work as it is of mine, if you could even say that, because of who you are and the mentoring figure that you've been to me. So I guess that's the origin story of the poet and the sage. It's not all of it, but it's some.
That's beautiful, Simon. Well, what about this? You spoke about this prose and poetry form finding you, in a sense. What I notice about the language of the book is that it has a proverbial quality, and a lot of the diction contains archaisms, which put the reader in mind of the Bible or some other holy text. And I was wondering if you were consciously choosing that diction style, or like this whole project, did the linguistic form simply present itself to you?
Yeah, well, that was an accident completely. As in, well, it's not an accident. It's it just started happening, and that was why writing this book, it really reintroduced me to the foundation that my parents built for me by raising me in the church. Even though I don't go anymore, nonetheless, when I started writing this poetry, it just naturally started coming out with all the these and thines and thous, and and it was really confusing to me at the start. It was really because I was kind of thinking, well, why is this kind of language the language that is coming out? And there would have been a moment there where I thought, yes, I'll roll with this. That was my choice. My choice was to go with it, right? But in the same way that I stumbled across, writing The Poet and the Sage, I stumbled across this language that I naturally like to write in. And I still, in many ways, write in that kind of archaic language with most of my poetry. And I was thinking about this because I did have, when I started studying divinity at Trinity College here in Brisbane, I had the initial interview, and one of the things that they said was, okay, so in all of your assignments, you're going to have to quote the New English translation or whatever. So we don't want the King James version, we want the updated version. And I was like, no. I said, no. And I'm glad I said that, because the professor who was there with me, he actually said, well, look, I understand that you can't match the beauty of the King James Bible. And I said, that's it. You can't match the beauty. And there is something incredibly important about beauty in a text, right? And then when they said, okay, so in your assignments as well, you're going to have to use inclusive language. So if you ever, feel the need to write, man instead of like people, you're going to have to write people or people kind in this. I was like, no, because that's not, you don't dictate how something is written, right? When I say man or mankind, I'm referring to everybody. And it's your job to figure that out. It's not my job to tell you, like, here I'm being this person who you want to be, being all inclusive. No, that's the language that they used in the King James Bible. And so I think that's what kind of happened with The Poet and the Sage. Is I decided to write something as beautifully as I could, and write about what I believe is the most important possible thing that we could all be seeking after, and I was thinking about this the other day, Sharon, because Seneca, in his first letter, and this is in the last episode of the Walled Garden, in his first letter, he writes about how, his first letter of Natural Questions, he writes about if he had never started peeling back the mysteries of nature, the mysteries of the universe, and questioning things like God, he said his life would never have been worth living. And what I discovered the other day is that really what that means is that Seneca is playing a game. And the game that he's playing is, in life, there's a whole bunch of information that we could seek to know. There's a whole bunch of things that we might have knowledge of. but they exist in a hierarchy where there are some things that are way more important to know than others. In the same way, I gave this example, if you're a pilot and your plane is going down and a flight attendant comes in and says, we've run out of meals, what do we do? The pilot is not going to then tend to the fact that they've run out of meals. He's going to say, hey, wrong question for this particular moment. The plane's going down. And in that same way in life, I think that it's our job in everything we do to be seeking what would be most important, what would be most sacred, what would be most
Yes.
why. And so when I think that if there's one thing that I did decide on from the start, it's that when I was writing this book, I didn't want to write another book that might become lost in the sands of time in terms of, here's my 10-step guide to Stoicism, or here's my, here's my personal development book. Or I wanted to truly wrestle with something that I believed was of fundamental importance. And I wanted to present that to people, because I guess I decided that if I could write anything, hopefully it would be something that transforms a person and changes the way that they see the world, so that they're not the same person when they finish the book as when they started. And so that's why the language, I guess, is because I was trying to, at every level, aim a little bit higher, and that just naturally started happening.
Well, Simon, what about this? It seems to me that the poet and the sage is a classic Houston Smith hero with 1,000 faces story. It follows the arc of the hero leaving the ordinary world, then being initiated into privileged knowledge through trials and challenges, traversing despair, and finally the hero returns to share his acquired wisdom with others who often, of course, do not understand or even fear the wisdom the hero offers. So I was wondering, Simon, why do you think archetypes are important, especially as they relate to the transmission of wisdom? Because you definitely pressed archetypes into service of the journey you have us take reading the book.
Yeah. This is another thing that I've been thinking a lot about, Sharon, because I think that it wasn't until I started writing this book that I think I've started to actually understand a little bit of what Carl Jung was getting at. Because I am highly uneducated in many ways. And so in that way, I feel like as the poet, I'm kind of writing all of this and I'm presenting it to people like yourself, and you're kind of looking back and saying, there's a whole bunch in here that maybe you don't see, but I see. And you've studied Jung, you've studied Joseph Campbell, you've studied all these people. I have not studied them in great depth. And so I think here's what I'll say. I did this, I've told everybody this before, but I'll say it again. I did this kind of exhibition with my photography, music, and some poetry that I wrote for Paradise Suite. And what I started to notice was the people who truly had transformational experiences with that poetry, as in the people who came there and would read this poetry and they would be moved to tears and they would want to talk to me and figure out, there was a lady there. I'll get to that later, actually. What I noticed, all these people who actually got it, they were Christians. And I was like, what is going on here? And I started to get it because Christians are brought up with this knowledge of that archetypal substructure that exists within every human being, because that's what the Bible is. It's a collection of extremely archetypal stories, and it's just drilled into you. There's so much of the stuff in this book bubbles up from the depths of that, both that biological strain that comes from my entire family who has grown up in Christian nations, as well as my own upbringing with my parents teaching me all these things. And so there is that real archetypal structure to it, but I wasn't sitting there thinking, I'm going to write an archetypal story and I'm going to put this archetype here, I'm going to put this one here. I just wrote this thing and
Yes.
And then it was really like Carl Jung, he talks about that collective unconscious, the collective psyche that contains that metaphorical substructure to everything that poets and musicians and artists, that's the bread of life that they go digging for. It's like that's the gold that they go digging for. Heraclitus, he said, men dig tons of gold. Sorry, men dig tons of earth to find an ounce of gold, right? And that statement, like, that hit me, right? Because what I'm doing with my poetry is I'm gold mining. I'm gold mining for wisdom. Wisdom is the gold that I'm searching for. And to the extent that I have found that in the poet and the sage, that has been a real mind-boggling, crazy journey for me, and a testament to what Carl Jung was talking about, in that for the poet, if they play their cards right, they can tap into that substructure of humanity and they can bring something up from the depths. And what you often have is, like you said, this archetypal story, which, if you're taking this with the degree of seriousness that it deserves to be taken with, this should horrify you. Like, it genuinely horrifies me that, I can have this experience, and in a way, I believe we all can have this experience of gaining deeper access into those levels of who we are as human beings. And so I think that what that also did, Sharon, was it just made me realize everything I do with my art from now on, and with my searching from now on, has to be matching that degree of seriousness of the adventure that I'm going on. And so that's, I guess, what I would say there is that, those archetypes, they come out, but I'm actually kind of relying on you, Sharon, and other people to kind of point back at me and say, do you know what this is? Do you know what this is? Do you know what this is? Because even you, Sharon, you've pointed out that some of my poems, they sound more like prayers. And that's interesting to me, because I don't think of them as prayers as I'm writing them. But when you say that, I think, yeah, makes sense. Yeah. And so, yeah. And just another reason why, Sharon, I've really brought you along as much as I can on this adventure, because that's what you teach me, is you point these things out and you show me the direction I'm going, even when I don't quite know, I guess.
Well, Simon, several of the things you've just said put me in mind of the idea that when we make art with the degree of seriousness, when we offer our art with the sense of seriousness of which you speak, which is just another way of saying that we're actually telling the truth. We're not going to hide. We're willing to enter dangerous territory. And in doing that, I think we can't conceal the iconography of our hearts, which, as you say, for you is the Christian iconography of your heart. Interestingly, as you know, I come from a very, very different set of traditions and was somewhat mystified when I read The Poet and the Sage the first time, because I wasn't raised with the story of Christ. I wasn't raised as a Christian. And the second time I read the book, it suddenly was blindingly obvious. Christ is embedded in this everywhere. And it was still, the text was still universal in its import for me. But I realized that I had to crack the code a little bit.
I'm still cracking the code, honestly. Like, even the last edit that I did of the book, I was still seeing different things that even I didn't know about what I'd written in terms of the connections throughout the book. And that's what's so interesting about this whole thing to me, is that I also get to go on that adventure of rereading and going deeper and deeper into this text. I want to say something as well for everybody who's listening. It would be a mistake to hear what Sharon just said and then to think that this is a Christian book, because I've been very influenced, as you all know, by Stoicism, extremely influenced by the theology of Stoicism as well. I've been very influenced by Taoism. The Tao Te Ching is just one of the most powerful books of all time. So for the people who, like, if you read this book and if you have a careful eye, and if you sit with it and if you spend the time, you will see the influence of Taoism. You will see the Stoicism. I even quote Marcus Aurelius a couple of times. I quote Heraclitus, I believe, as well. Maybe not. That might be in a few other poems. But the Taoism is there, the Christianity is there, the Stoicism is there. And I think that what I'm also excited about, Sharon, is there is a structure of theology in this book. There is a metaphysical structure to this book. Now I've wrestled with the ideas therein, but now I'm actually excited to go a little bit deeper into my wrestling with them and actually, not just say, okay, cool, I think I understand what I'm saying here, but even with studying divinity and with having the kinds of conversations that we're going to be having in the walled garden, I'm excited to put these ideas on the table and see if they stand up to scrutiny. There's principles all throughout this book that I want to throw out there and say, what do you guys think of this? Is this true? Is this right? Is this wisdom? Is it not? Tell me, I want to hear. And so I hope that everybody who reads it as well, I hope that people email me once they've read it and say, this bit stuck out to me, maybe this seems right. I hope people give me feedback, and tell me what they get from it. And I also think that it would just be a real mistake if people got this book and thought that what they were reading is just poetry and prose, because what I've discovered over the past year and a half is that the kind of wisdom and truth that is embodied in deep poetry and sacred poetry, and people like Rilke and even people like Bukowski, man, poetry has the ability to really contain a lot of wisdom and truth in a very short space. And so in that way, I want to encourage everybody to think of this not just as a book of poetry and prose, but as a work of philosophy, as a work of theology, as a work that you can truly wrestle with as a student of philosophy and see what you get out of it. So I just hope that that's something that I hope that that's the way that people approach the book.
One of the things I learned from reading the poet and the sage is the benefit of using poetry to tell stories and impart lessons, since poetry points to meanings obliquely so that readers don't feel talked at or proselytized to. And I think poetry and prose allow readers to get under the words, to discover insights for themselves, to have their own personal revelations. I think someone should pass out the wine and cheese now, and we should open this up.
I think so. I might, if it's okay, I'd like to maybe read the first,
Oh, yes.
maybe the first 3 poems of the book. And then I want to open it up to everybody. And I also just want to quickly say, that's the way that I approached writing the book. Designing the book, I think, was almost equally important. And here's why I think that. I mean, in the ancient times, you know, the way that you covered something was a symbol of that something's worth or value. And when I was thinking about the way that I wanted to design the book, I want to show you guys this because I'm actually really grateful. This is somebody who I really have to thank is Peter Palmer, who is my my publisher. And you know, Peter from the start was willing to say, Simon, you're the artist, you're the poet, design the book that you want, I'll fund it, we'll make it happen, right? And so what that means is that I had full liberty to say, well, I don't want a paperback. I want it to be beautiful, and I want it to be sturdy, and I want it to be something that you can hold in your hands and say, this is something that I want to sit with. And so what we have is this beautiful, I've designed this whole thing. This is the poet and the sage here. That's a photo of the hills up near where I grew up. And what I've decided to do as well is we turned it into a beautiful material bound hardcover right there. So that's it. And what I love about the hardcover book as well is that it's got poetry in the book that I'm not actually going to release anywhere else but the hardcover book. So there's just little extras in this book that can help you to have a really beautiful experience with it. But I'll read a couple of poems and then we'll dive into a conversation. If anybody has any questions, like prepare them now, and I'd love to hear them. So this is the prologue. And I believe this might actually be, I can't remember exactly, this might be the first poem that I've written, apart from the ones that from when I was very younger. So, if thy mind doth seek adventure, which a great mind often will, then walk with me to heaven, and there thou'lt find thy thrill. For heaven is a place where people go to find their story, and although we've all been called, only some will find their glory. This chapter is called Rise. On a dark and frosty meadow for the dawning of the sun, the morning birds are singing, for their day has just begun. A cool breeze gently shifts the trees while all the world is waking. A golden hue now pierces night as distant stars are fading. The sun now slowly rises, giving light to those who see, and all his face now shines upon reflects with fervent glee. And all who are nourished by the sun's peculiar rays. The campfire warms them through their nights, and the sunlight through their days. The cold and lonely valley now becomes a lively sight, as foxtails glide above the grass and bugs reflect the light. And all that is ising, as the daylight shelters all from the terrors that the nighttime brings. But every sun must fall. He'll rise with might to midday heights and bear his horrid fate. He'll slowly sink below the hills, 'neath Mother Nature's weight. And never will he shirk from this divine preordination, for even the sun that shines above is bound by fate's causation. Wilt thou now feel the warmth of he who shines from heaven's heights, sharing wisdom with each son of his who every candle lights? Wilt thou listen to his promptings as he seeks to chaos part? Wilt thou sit upon a mountain, writing wisdom from thy heart? Or wilt thou ever tarry in the land of distant dreaming? Wilt thou let thy fire smolder as the darkness now is scheming? I say, arise and be thou clean, for the night is soon to come, and all who now are sleeping will a dragon's feast become. And then I'm just going to read a couple more pages. This is called The Call. And this poem is, this is the first moment when the poet is introduced. So there was a time, the future told, when a poet sat in his cabin cold and dreamed his dream and scribed his lyric and dyed his soul with his thoughts satiric. And when he paused to take delight and to praise his intellectual might, past lightly frosted window sills, he cast his eyes to the distant hills. And as he marveled at the sight, his incandescent soul took flight. Oh, to see the fading hills afar as they hid the sun and woke a star. And as was done for tradition's sake, he looked upon that star and spake, I wish upon this evening star that with her wisdom I may spar. And though his superstitions lacked, his wish and answer did attract, for clear as day and dark as night, the hills did whisper a ghastly plight. Be careful where thou seekest, son, for now thou art the chosen one to hear my words and set thine aim at saving thy village on the plain. And if thine eyes will see this sight, and if thine ears will truth invite, and if thine hands will wisdom write, I'll make of thee a guiding light. But if thine eyes should turn asunder, if thine ears hear not my thunder, babes will scream and teeth will gnash, and thee and thy village will burn to ash. For all thy people are turned corrupt, and many idols they construct. They live lives of sin and vice, and they will pay a dreadful price. For if they listen not to thee, whose words will come direct from me, if from contrition they refrain, I'll smite thy village on the plain. The poet knew not what to do, so in a fit his soul withdrew, and holding back his fearful chills, he turned once more to the distant hills. And now a gloomy silhouette, he asked the hills what he had met, a daemon speaking truth and light, or a frightful dream on a winter's night. So if I could say one more thing before we jump into the Q&A, I guess I was thinking about this, Sharon. I think one line in that last poem really sums up what happened with the poet and the sage, where the distant hills, or whatever you would call them, is speaking back to the poet and says, be careful what you wish for, son. Because the poet sees this star and wishes to spar with wisdom. And I think that that's what happened when I wrote that initial dream, and when I came to you. I think the wish that I had was, maybe this is a springboard into what might turn into something that resembles wisdom. And I don't want to make that claim, but what I do want to say is that that idea of being careful what you wish for, that's a scary idea, because I think that what I wished for, I received in what started to flow through. But I'll let people be the judge of that. So yeah, I want to open it up to everyone. And I just want to say thank you so much for everybody for being here. In this group of people, I'm so honored that everybody is here, but I also see some people who I've had the real fortune of spending a lot of time with, whether they are clients. It's been an emotional morning, Sharon. I've been spending some time writing in a few copies, writing notes to people who I'm giving them to today. But I see a few people who I've worked with on a very close basis here, and they know who they are, and it's just beautiful to see here. And I'm honored that, you know, you've been with me for so long and now supporting me in this journey. So I'm going to open it up to questions. And also, if you have questions for Sharon, fire them at Sharon as well. You know, I don't want to be the only person talking here. So